Hey there again, welcome to another episode for BCM 215. In my DA, I talked about how Resident Evil revolutionized survival horror. To start it off, I want to thank everyone that watched my previous video. And I also heard your comments, and I'll try my best to integrate more questions that you guys had into my final DA. In this video, I'll be talking about how it revolutionized survival horror, more on it, and how was this genre in the beginning, and were there any games that were in this genre, and if there were games like Resident Evil, why didn't they work out? And lastly but not the least, how did they start off in their journey for becoming one of the best? So without further ado, let's dive straight in. So, as we all know, that Resident Evil debuted in 1996, and it was the first of its genre called survival horror, which also created a whole new fan of base, as there was a number of Resident Evil fans that arose in 1996, and as well as GameSpot also listed Resident Evil as one of the 15 most influential video games of all time. It is credited with defining and popularizing the genre of survival horror. It is also credited with taking video games in a cinematic directions, as it created a lot of movies because of this genre. Moving on to how was survival horror in the beginning. As of 1981, the title of 3D Monster Maze used a different kind of monster, a massive and a seriously pissed off T-Rex. The theme of the game was ultimately the same. It was to survive, so it was still under the survival horror category. And in 1982, the haunted house has since found itself a part of the survival horror genre as well. Despite being one of the genre's earliest pioneers, survival horror was a term that itself would not be coined for more than a decade, which was 1996, as Resident Evil was the first to coin it out. And in 1992, the Lovecraftian Wonderland, Alone in the Dark, aided in pioneering the survival horror game, and the player assumes the role of the detective who shocks and is tasked with investigating a haunted mansion, despite not yet waving the survival horror flag, as the term has not been coined yet, as I repeated earlier. Furthermore, I'll be running down the top 3 worst survival games to ever exist that never made it onto the top charts. First is Escape Dead Island, which was garnered far worse reviews than its original counterpart. Though the original game didn't exactly receive overwhelmingly positive feedback, it was said to have poor structure and little replay value, unlike Resident Evil, which had great game structure and replay value. The second game I'm going to talk about is Infestation Survival Stories, which had a short life. The servers were taken offline in 2016, just 4 years after its initial date, and sales-wise, the game actually did pretty well, as it sold over 2.8 million copies. Unfortunately though, the game's developers, the OP Production, were surrounded by controversy, and which caused the game to suffer a lot. To put the icing on the cake, let's talk about how Resident Evil was able to sustain its level of success for 17 years. The secret honestly lies in its elaborate settings and world. Horror is a common entertainment genre around the world, but Resident Evil adopted the setting of epidemic disaster that could be a reality rather than a wild fantasy in order to make the horror convincing. Capcom also says that the main characters have made many appearances, spanning all over the titles and getting older and more mature as the series goes on. A character who was a rookie police officer when he debuted in the member of an organization under the direct control of the president in the latest game, and the powerless young girl has matured into a US agent. Rather than fading away over the 17 years, they have become even more deeper characters. Capcom also cites that constant swapping of development and producer talent for every title, with each creator adding its own touch to the strong Resident Evil identity. This is what honestly makes Resident Evil so great and unique in its great own ways.